Hi there, welcome to this week's weekly Forex forecast. It's Monday the 14th of June. So for those of you that have been following the financial markets, you would have noticed last week that we had some really strong inflation data out of the US. Inflation is now running at 5% year on year. Remember, central banks are mandated to control inflation around 2%. Now, the Fed have been talking about inflation over the recent months. They've basically been saying that the inflation rises that we're seeing, they're going to be transitory, they're going to be temporary. But now the markets are waking up and thinking, well, hang on, maybe the Fed are going to have to start rethinking this strategy. So all important week coming up this week. We've got the FOMC, which is basically where the Fed decide on interest rates. Now, one way of controlling interest rates, one way of controlling inflation is to flood the markets with money. And that's basically what they've been doing for recent times. But now there's a talk that they may ease back on that. It's actually called tapering in the business. So all eyes will be watching if indeed they're going to be tapering this week. Okay, so now let's look at the momentum meter. Now the momentum meter, I don't know how anyone can trade the currency markets without using something like this. It basically tells me where the money is flowing, what currencies are being bought and what currencies are being sold. I think that is really important to know that when you're trading the currency markets. And as trend followers, we like to buy the strong currencies, the currencies that are moving up, and we like to sell those currencies that are weakening, those currencies that are moving down. So this shows us here that the green line, aptly colored for the greenback, that's the US dollar, is showing some strength at the moment. So the US dollar is one of the strongest currencies on the basket of 8. And this blue line down here, this is the euro, showing some signs of weakness in the euro. ECB met last week and they were basically not talking about any form of easing back on their bond buying and any of their stimulus. So that's going to weigh on the euro this week as well, I think. So the euro dollar is basically inclined to have maybe a move down. We need to look for our strategy rules to see if indeed there are some setups. But that certainly looks like the bias going on at the moment. We're seeing some strength coming into the Australian dollar here. This is the orange line showing some strength there. And we're seeing some weakness in those other commodity currencies. That's the Canadian dollar and the New Zealand dollar. So maybe there are some opportunities in buying Aussie against the New Zealand. In fact, let's have a look at what we're looking at this week. Aussie New Zealand is a potential long trade going up. This has been a wonderful trending market of late, having some nice moves and then pullbacks and moves. These pullbacks give us the opportunities to enter the market looking at certain criteria, bullish pin bars, bullish engulfers, 50% pullbacks and the like, the strategies that we teach here inside the room at forexsignals.com. So we're looking for trend continuation of the Aussie New Zealand. It's had a nice little pullback and we're putting in some bullish price action as well. So we're looking at Aussie New Zealand for long trade. Also looking at the DAX, which is the German stock market, now coming up to a level of resistance. It's looking as though that the risk on is still there in the markets. S&P 500 hitting all-time highs. So we're looking now for a breakout of this resistance zone for the DAX and then a potential move higher after a retest. Often, as you know, old resistance becomes support. That's basically where we'll be maybe looking to enter. And I'm looking at a euro dollar short trade, really for the reasons I have just mentioned, that the US dollar now is getting big, those really, really strong inflation numbers, although the yields are still waning, lagging behind, but those strong inflation numbers, I don't think the Fed can ignore those, and certainly the dollar longs are out there at the moment, hoovering up some dollars as we go, and the euro looking weak. So we're looking at potential sell of the euro US dollar. Down to the 120.50 level. Max is looking at a gold long trade. I don't know if you've been following Max's commentaries on gold recently. He's been getting that pretty much on the money in terms of his directional bias, and it looks as though he's got this one right as well. He's looking for a long gold trade up to back to 1900 and beyond as well. So a gold trade for Max. Okay, let's just quickly jump onto the screens out and look at a couple of charts and of course the economic calendar. Come on, let's go. Okay, so let's start off by looking here at a chart showing us the dollar index. It's basically the US dollar pitched against 6 of the main currencies around the globe. And you can see here at the moment, we are continuing to make these higher lows on these pullbacks, indicating that some strength is now gathering pace for the US dollar. You see this ascending triangle here at support, indicating potential reversal of this downtrend that we have been seeing. But what's got my attention more so is this level of previous support acting as resistance. We've shot through it a couple of times now, and now we're just breaking above and we're holding this level. I think while price is maintaining this level, the bias continues to be to the upside. And indeed, if we do have a favorable FOMC this week, you could see this back up there challenging the 91 level. And our next level of, I would say, meaningful resistance will be up there at 91, sort of 35 to 50 zones. So that is basically our target in here for the dollar on a favorable FOMC. And indeed, if this does push up to these levels, you're likely to see that euro against the US dollar push lower. Remember, the euro is the most actively traded currency pair on the planet. Often it is the case that if the dollar pushes higher, the euro is going to come under pressure because it is the most actively traded currency pair on the planet. I think it accounts for about 35% of all FX transactions. Okay, so this chart shows us the S&P 500. It's the top 500 companies traded out in the US. And you can see here today, at the time of recording, we are now hitting all-time highs. We touched it basically back at the beginning of May, touched it again last week, follow my crosshairs, and now this morning we've opened up and we are trading to the upside. This is a classic case of risk on. Risk on basically means there's money flowing into the higher risk assets, such as the stock market. Normally when that happens, the safe haven currencies, the low yielding currencies, the funding currencies, such as the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, all have negative interest rates. Basically, they tend to underperform, and that's basically what's happening at the moment. So as trend followers, we always like to buy the strong currencies and sell the weak currencies. So I've got my eye on basically buying crosses against the Japanese yen this week. Normally the commodity currencies like the Canadian dollar, New Zealand dollar, Australian dollar, they normally tend to perform quite well in times of risk on as economies are expanding and growing and what have you. Then of course they need commodities. Those currencies do quite well, especially currencies such as the Australian dollar. So maybe looking at an Australian dollar long against the Japanese yen may also be a trade that might give us some potential opportunities. So we're definitely a case of risk on in the markets for this week, and indeed we'll take our clues from the stock market to see indeed where this wants to go. Of course, FOMC later on in the week, we need to pay attention to that. In fact, we'll look at the economic calendar now to see exactly what we've got in store. Come on. Okay, so this is the economic calendar. As I always say, I do suggest you have one of these to hand. You can access ours here at forexsignals.com. You scroll down to the bottom, you'll see economic calendar. I think it's really important if you're trading the financial markets that you know what's coming up around the corner. The last thing you want to be doing is entering your trade just ahead of some big high impact news that you weren't expecting. Okay, so the way to read this is, of course, looking to the right. Anything that is deemed to be red impact, that's high impact news. You should be paying attention to it, relevant to the particular country. Here you'll see basically tomorrow, it's about 19 hours from now, we've got some big data out of the UK in terms of the average earnings. Average earnings, very important because it basically tells us what people are earning. And if people are earning lots more money than they did the previous month, that basically means they're likely to spend more money, and that basically means inflation is likely to push higher. That basically means that the central bank, the Bank of England, may have to start thinking about moving rates higher to make sure inflation is kept under control. So it's an early signs of inflationary pressure. So that's in the UK tomorrow, and you're scrolling down. Now, also, we've got some big US data as well in terms of retail sales out of the US. Okay, you've got the estimate in here. Anything that beats the estimation by a large degree is likely to impact the market. If you're in doubt about any of the actual reads, what they mean, you just click on them. It will give you a brief description of what the data release is and how it's likely to impact the particular country's currency. Okay, so we've got lots of data out, inflation data out. Remember, we had some really strong inflation data out last week. If these numbers are going to be pushed to the upside, then the Fed certainly won't be able to ignore that. So a whole bunch of data coming out tomorrow on the 15th. So we need to pay attention to that. And that basically is in front of the all-important FOMC, which is on the 16th, there you go, the interest rate decision, unchanged on interest rates. But as with all these interest rate decisions, it's the forward guidance that we need to pay attention to. Are they going to be talking about easing back on those bond buying purchases? If indeed they even hint at that, then you expect the US dollar to continue to grind higher. So we're paying a particular attention to that. Later on in the week, we've also got the Swiss National Bank and their rate decision as well. Again, not expecting any change. They're going to leave their rates potentially at negative 0.75. But of course, the press conference will be keenly watched to find out if they're indeed going to be supporting their currency, indeed, or even selling their currency, which they've been known to be doing quite a lot. So it gives us a view on what they're thinking going forward. So pay attention to that as well. Later on in the week, we've got European inflation data as well. The consumer price index, basically it is inflation, tells us what the inflation is running out as well. And you know, last week the central bank, European Central Bank, were pretty not interested in talking about easing back on any of their assistance, stimulus. We'll see indeed if that is justified with these inflation data releases later on in the week. And that's really about it in terms of the Eurozone data. We do have UK retail sales out later on in the week as well. That's 3 days away from now. Again, retail sales is important because it tells us what people are doing on the high street. Are they spending lots of money? If they're spending lots of money, it basically means inflation is going up, and the central bank may need to react to curb any explosive growth in inflation. That's why we look at these economic releases throughout the calendar month. So make sure you have one of these to hand. As I say, you can access this one, forexsignals.com. Scroll down to the bottom, bookmark it, and it's there for you to use absolutely free. Okay, so I hope you found that useful as always. Don't forget, we are streaming live around the clock, up to 6 times a day, 5 days a week. If you want to come over, take part, see what it's all about, you can do so. Just follow the link in the description below and it will take you to where you need to go. So an exciting week we've got in store with some central bank rate decisions, and we're expecting to see some nice moves in the Forex markets. Get involved. Let's see if we can make some pips.